Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Coming to America. So what Coming to America is essentially about is we do center, of course, on Akeem Jaffer, but he is now the king of Zamunda after his father has, or is in the process of passing away. And basically when he is, given this, he realizes that they need to find a new prince because it is Zamundian tradition to do so. And he ends up finding out that, when he was in America, back in the 80s, he ended up having a one-night stand and had a son that he did not know about. So he decides that he's going to track down this son and basically with the intention of basically making him become king and hopefully, following Zamunda law and things like that. So Coming to America, it's really interesting to talk about this film because going into this one, I had not really been all that familiar with the first movie, but I did watch it before this one, and the first Coming to America is, I think, a comedy classic. It definitely is a hilarious film, but it's also a great film about, finding genuine love and things like that. And it's a great film for Eddie Murphy to, really showcase his talents, playing a role that isn't overly raunchy, this gentleman that wants to find actual love. He doesn't want it to be prescribed to him. He doesn't want like an arranged marriage. He wants a genuine connection. And I think that's something that the first film did a very good job with. But I will admit, watching that film, I kind of thought, I don't really know what else we need here. I don't know why you would want to make a second film. I don't really think there's anything you can add, but I still went into it optimistic, hoping that this film would turn out well. Comedy sequels in general, they don't turn out great nowadays, especially ones that, are from years ago and are finally now coming out. They don't have a great track record, and I will say Coming to America is definitely one of the better comedy sequels, but that doesn't really mean it's a good movie either. Coming to America is a harmless sequel that doesn't do anything to ruin the first one, but it definitely could have been a lot better in many areas as well. Now, getting into the things, though, that really do work about this movie, all of the cast here is really good. Everyone's definitely having a really, fun time within this film. Eddie Murphy is just as good as he was as Akeem. He's still very charming. You can tell that he really does enjoy playing this role, and he also does feel a little bit more adult here, and I think he does do a good job with that. And Eddie Murphy is just someone that, he's such a charismatic actor, and you just can't help but love everything that he's doing, and that's definitely no different when it comes to this film. He does a really great job with here. Same goes for Arsenio Hall, who, the first movie, I really loved what they ended up doing, with the character of Semi, and here he doesn't have nearly as much to do as he did in that film, but it's still a lot of fun to watch, and the dynamic between those two has really been, is really just as great as it was in the first film. They work so well together, and they just have such a natural chemistry that you really do believe throughout this entire film. But when it comes to the new cast as well, they also do some really great work. Jermaine Fowler especially, I really liked in this film a lot as the character of Lavelle. He's your typical everyman that's just kind of thrown into this role that he really isn't all that used to, but he's really fun when doing it. You find yourself really liking this character. In the same vein that you liked Akeem in the first movie, you find yourself liking Lavelle here, and I think Fowler did a really good job with that. Leslie Jones, surprisingly, was really good here too. This is definitely one of the better roles I've seen her in. I don't normally like her in a lot of things, but I actually really liked her here. I thought she was definitely a lot of fun. She's not used to any of the luxurious lifestyle that she's kind of thrown into, and she's a lot of fun to watch here for sure. KiKi Layne has some stuff to do. I was very happy to see her again. I really haven't seen her much since If Beale Street Could Talk, but she plays, Akeem's daughter, and who does want to inherit the throne in some way. She kind of wants to change the Zamundian law, and I thought she definitely did do a really good job here. Shari Headley is still really good. And then the only other performance I think that really does stick out in this film is Wesley Snipes, who plays the villain here of General Izzy, and does it perfectly, may I say. He goes all in really just showing the lengths that this character is willing to go with, and he's a lot of fun to watch. Just this entire cast, everyone seems like they're having the time of their life. Everyone works very well together, and I was very impressed by the ensemble here, especially for a film that was made so many years ago. It's really good to see that this cast, they still have that spirit and essence of what really made that first film so great, which was such a talented cast, and thankfully that does transfer over to this film. So while the cast here I think is really stellar and definitely one of the best elements of the film, unfortunately, virtually everything else is what brings this film down. The directing here by Craig Brewer, it's not bad. I wouldn't say his directing is bad. It definitely does still have a lot of heart. It definitely does have, a lot of fun to it, but it also feels largely disposable. It doesn't really feel like he is doing much directing-wise to make this film really stick out. I mean, the one thing I will say is that this film does have a bit more of an action element to it. Akeem has trained his daughters, in case of a threat, and so we do actually get to see a little bit more like hand-to-hand combat going on, and that's kind of cool. But like aside from that, there isn't a lot going on here in terms of directing, and unfortunately I'm also sad to say this film just isn't really all that funny, and so that stuff really does not land in the way that it should, and that's where I think Brewer's directing really kind of does suffer here. His directing just is not on par with the way the first film was done. The first film, every joke hit so hard, and that's not really the case here. And I think what this film is really missing is the edge of the first one. This film is PG-13, and that should have been a red flag immediately that this just wasn't going to be as funny, because it's not that the film isn't funny. I want to reiterate that. There are moments that are generally funny here, but the problem is that it just feels a lot more tame and a lot more, toned down from the first movie, and it just doesn't really work. I think something that works so well in the first Coming to America is that it was very raunchy, and that it wasn't afraid to go to some, a really adult places, and I think that's what really worked with the first one. But here, it feels like they're stifled. It feels like they can't be as funny because of the rating. It holds them back almost, and I think that's one of the things that does kind of hurt this film overall. However, the writing here is the other thing that does bring this film down, because I will say the actual premise of this film is not a bad one. I like the idea that Akeem and Semi are going back to Queens, New York, and they're going to, meet his long-lost son. That is a really good setup, and there's a lot you can do with that, and I do appreciate the fact that this film is far more focused on Zamunda. While the first film, the focus was Queens, New York, this one is almost entirely in Zamunda. We do go to Queens for 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, but we're not there for that long. The focus of this movie really is Zamunda, and I think that was a really smart idea, because while we did get to see it in the first film, we only saw it in bits. Here, we really do get to see the full extent of everything, and I think that was a really smart idea. And I also like the fact that this film is just as focused on Lavelle as it is on Akeem, because while Akeem was sort of a fish out of water in Queens, New York, you see that Lavelle and his mom are very much fishes out of water in Zamunda, and I think that is a really good idea. But again, I'm saying ideas. And that's because while I think there are some good ideas in this film, I just don't think overall the execution worked in the way that I wanted it to. And I think that is overall what did end up bringing this film down for me. I mean, the biggest problem easily is, one, like I said, the film just isn't very funny. The jokes are not really landing in the way that they should. It's not that it's not funny. There are moments that did admittedly make me laugh, but they were very sparingly. There wasn't anything on the level of the first film, and it's not like the first film when they, first walk into that, horrible beaten up apartment and they're like, we'll just take this, stuff like that. There's nothing really like that in this movie. There are moments that do work, but I'm struggling to remember one moment in this film that generally had me laughing hysterically. I just don't think it was really there. And I think that is definitely something that brings the film down. But my other biggest complaint with this movie is that it seems to not really understand understand some of what made that first film work. Aside from just stripping away from some of the raunchiness of the first movie, Akeem as a character here feels very off. You know, he's still fun to watch and you do still root for him, but his arc in this movie just doesn't really make a lot of sense because he's so focused on Zamundian culture and what people of Zamunda are supposed to do. This is Zamundian law. We're not going to try to deviate away from that. But the problem is Akeem of the first movie would never be interested in this sort of thing. His whole thing in the first movie is that he didn't care about Zamundian law. He wanted to make a genuine connection with someone. He wanted a genuine human connection. And so it doesn't really make sense when in this movie he is so hell-bent on the idea that a prince has to be, that it has to be a prince. It can't be a princess. It can't be one of his daughters. This is Zamundian law. We need to stick, but he's very by the book in that way. And it just doesn't really make sense for Akeem as a character. It feels like this is almost retracting from his arc of the first movie. This is something that he really should not care all that much about. And it'd be different if, let's say, he's grown accustomed to it. Maybe he's grown accustomed to this sort of thing and he doesn't really want to let go of it because he enjoys it, but that's not really what they do. He's portrayed as this very strict sort of father, and it just doesn't really work in this movie. It feels almost like he is James Earl Jones's character in the first film, and I just didn't really like that at all. I didn't think it was a smart choice for his character. I do like what they end up doing with his daughter. There's a whole subplot in the movie with KiKi Layne's character where she wants to be the one to take over. She feels that she is qualified to do so, and she feels that she's more interested than, say, Lavelle is, and I think it would have been a much better idea, though, if Akeem was on her side throughout all of this. If it was maybe this court battle or something where, he's trying to change Zamundian law and, still be able, give her, show Zamundas that she has the requirements to take over and things like that. And I think that would have just made for a much better story than what we ended up getting, because honestly, what we end up getting here is very similar to the first film. Lavelle is in this arranged marriage, and at first he really likes it, but there's another girl that he clearly is eyeing, this servant that he is constantly, bonding with. But Akeem isn't really down for that because he just wants things to work out the way that they should. And then you have him trying to get accustomed to Zamundian culture, similar to the first movie where Akeem was trying to get accustomed to, how people act outside of Zamunda. So again, there's a lot of callbacks in this movie, and a lot of them feel very forced. As you saw in the trailer, they do run in with, say, the barbers again. They do run in with, Sexual Chocolate. They make a cameo in this movie. There's just a lot of references to that first film, and a lot of it feels very forced. A lot of it feels very on the nose in that way, and I think they could have done a much better job in focusing more on telling a different story, and they're just not really doing that here. It's a lot of, it feels very familiar to the first film in that way, and again, it's just not as funny as what that first film really gave us, so I think that ultimately does bring it down. And then Wesley Snipes' character, as much as I do like him in the movie, and he's definitely the character that gets the most laughs, he does feel very one-dimensional. His character is someone that he has his own agenda. He clearly wants to take over the throne in some way, and we've seen this trope done before. We've seen this character before. He doesn't really give us anything that different. It's more just Snipes' performance that really makes the character work, but aside from that, there really is nothing given to this character that I found to be all that interesting. I also think there are a few too many characters in this movie. Tracy Morgan does play a pretty pivotal role in this, but after a while, you're just kind of wondering, why he's really here. He has some fun moments overall, but they just don't really do enough with him, and I think that goes for quite a few characters in this movie that they just really don't do enough with, and I think there's just too many characters here overall. So again, I think there's some good ideas in this movie, but just overall as a screenplay, it doesn't really work in the way that it should, and I think that's what ultimately does bring this film down. The cinematography here, though, I will say, is amazing. The look of Zamunda especially is just fantastic to look at. It's very lavish, it's very colorful, it has a very specific look and feel to it, and I think they captured it really well. That's definitely the one takeaway I will definitely give this movie when watching it, is that they really did do a great job with the look and feel of Zamunda. Everything feels very polished, this feels very tangible in that way, and that's something I really did appreciate with this film. I think there's some really beautiful sequences here. Just in general, the cinematography is a constant standout throughout this film, and I think that's definitely something that a lot of people are going to enjoy. The score here, I definitely did enjoy as well. I think the score was really good. I do think this movie is far too long, though. The movie is 110 minutes, and it very much did not need to be. This could have easily been like a 90-minute film. The second half especially, the film really does drag. Once Lavelle has pretty much become, you know, he's gotten used to Zamundian culture, it just kind of feels like the film is dragging from there until we do get to a conclusion that feels very predictable. You know where this film is going to go, and it goes there, and it doesn't really do anything that different. But I want to reiterate, this film is still harmless. It doesn't do anything to ruin the first film. It does remind you of what you enjoy about that first film. It has a very committed cast. It has some really good cinematography, but it has a story that feels very familiar and certain character beats that just don't really align with what we get in that first film. I wouldn't say this is an utter disappointment or anything, but I just think there are a lot of aspects in which this film could have been a lot better for sure. It definitely is a film that can be very enjoyable, but it also is in the camp where it feels instantly forgettable, mainly because it just doesn't really do all that much to stick out. It does have some elements that I thought were cool, like I said, the action stuff and things like that. That's something that I did appreciate. It has a climax that I definitely did like overall, but everything I liked about this film, I just felt there were better ways that they could have done it, and I just would have liked for them to, especially given the fact that they had so much time to come up with this film, I think there's definitely a lot more that they could have done with it that they did not. Coming to America was not as disappointing as I think some people fear it might be, but it's still really not that great of a sequel, so I am going to give it a C+. So guys, in my review of Coming to America, let me know if you guys saw this tomorrow. Love to hear your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.